All right. Well, welcome. I'm sure some additional folks will join us, but we're going to go ahead and get started. We're glad you're here. Thanks for joining us for an important webinar about the practical, financial, legal, everything you sort of need to know about living off campus. My name is Christy DeSantis. I'm the Director of Administration and Assessment in Housing and Residence Life. And our plan is to spend the next hour with you sharing as much information as we can in as organized a way as possible. We're recording this webinar so that we can post it for those who are not able to join us. So we're about to throw a bunch of information your direction. Please know that because of the time constraints this evening and the ground we have to cover, we're going to do our best to do that as quickly as we can, covering as much ground as we can. But you can always reach out afterwards to any one of our offices in order to get some additional information. We'll also be monitoring the Q&A as we go. And so if you have questions that you're hoping we're going to cover, or we say something that confuses you, or you want some additional information on, drop that in the Q&A. And we'll do our best to respond as we go. And then we'll take a look at that as we wrap up, and we'll save some time at the end for questions there too. So please know you'll be able to go back to this recording and pause if there are particular screens that you want. Take a deeper dive on, you'll be able to do that at a later date from the comfort of your desk or your couch. And so I am going to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves, and then we will get underway.
Hi, everybody. I'm Labria Wilson. I'm the Assistant Director for Off-Campus Student Services. And so I'll be covering that piece of the presentation. Thank you for being here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley McIlerney. I'm the Director of UNC Charlotte Student Legal Services, Inc., and I'll be covering the legal tips portion of the presentation. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Obruba. I'm the Assistant Director for Niner Finances. And we're going to cover the kind of cost piece that's associated with living off campus.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bruce Blackman, Director of Financial Aid, and we'll be talking about, financial aid and how to get refunds and how to pay for off-campus housing.
So big thanks to my colleagues for joining me this evening. We're going to get started with a few objectives. So we hope by the end of this, you'll understand the benefits and challenges of living off campus, including everything you might need to know from a financial perspective and a legal perspective. Get some practical tips about where to start, if you haven't done that yet, where to start your off-campus search, and understand the vast array of resources and available to you on campus, not only when you're searching, but when you live off campus. We want to make sure that you stay connected to those resources on campus. So we'll start, Ashley, with you. Take it away from a Niner Finances.
Yeah. So first we want to look at what are our options. We have a little chart here that kind of has some different columns that we're comparing. We're doing some cost comparison. So we don't want to just take the first option that we find and just run with it. We want to be able to maximize our budget. So off-campus rent will rise about 5 to 8% for 2024, 2025. The cost of living, unfortunately keeps on driving up, and that's included. That housing cost is included in that. Some things to consider within that cost as well are things like, is the apartment furnished? Is it unfurnished? As well as, are we looking at apartments that are a little bit further out from the university? Typically within the university bubble, there are those apartments that have utilities and furnishings, sometimes usually included, but the further that you go out, the housing prices do differ. So we always like to talk about some of the more invisible financial implications or the hidden financial implications that we don't really necessarily think of right away when we think of living off campus. So we want to think about roommates. Typically, when we're looking at like a 4-person apartment or a 3-person apartment, When you divide that cost up, that's going to be a little bit less per person per room versus a student living on their own in a one-person apartment. So they can really divide those costs. But you also have to take into consideration damages. So sometimes when you have a roommate that will damage something, your student might be held liable for that. So really making sure that you're keeping track of those damages. Like to tell people, you know, when you first go in, when you're inspecting your apartment, take timestamp photos. So that way, you know, at the end of the time, when it comes to your security deposit, you know, you can say, well, this is what my room looked like. You know, these were the damages that were caused by this roommate. And also too, we want to talk about like cleanliness, keeping a track on cleanliness, because that can also impact the cost of living. So I have seen students who have to lose their security deposit because they don't keep up with cleaning. And by the end of the time that they've been in an apartment, it does not look so good. They also have to think about groceries. So we think about possibly getting like a bulk membership, maybe dividing those groceries up if you have a 4-person apartment. Things like parking. So sometimes it might be an additional cost to park at the apartment complex or the housing complex. Upon signage fees. So these are things like your security deposit, transfer fees, admin fees, application fees. These are kind of like those hidden expenses that are sometimes in there. Sometimes there's also things like additional fees such as like trash, things that are kind of not really utilities, but not really upon signage fees. They're kind of like in the middle. So some things are kind of thrown in there as well. We talked about furniture. Is it going to be furnished, unfurnished? Is that quality of furniture going to last? We have students that are young and bustling, and you know, sometimes they jump on furniture a little bit too hard and that might break. So are we going with IKEA or are we going with something sturdier? Then we have our utilities, so electric, gas, water, internet. Sometimes these are included depending on the complex, and as well as groceries. We know that the cost of living has increased. Groceries are also included in that. So we want to be mindful with how much food has risen and where we're shopping at. Can we split those groceries? Things of that nature. So protecting yourself. So you can rent by room. There are apartment complexes to where you can rent each individual room. You don't have to sign a whole entire lease where one person is responsible. Sometimes you can do the individual spaces themselves. Most off-campus apartments are going to require renter's insurance. Some of that is going to be included in the month-to-month cost. Some of it will be an additional cost. We highly recommend that you have renter's insurance if this is something that's not already included. There are some apartment complexes that may have additional penalties if you don't have renter's insurance, so that's something to keep a lookout for as well. There's also minimum requirements to personal possession and liabilities with renter's insurance. We always tell people read the fine lines. Sometimes you might have a student who really doesn't know how to use the oven quite right, and they might cause some damage. You know, they might put some mac and cheese in the microwave without water, and you might be losing a couple things. So we want to make sure that your student is covered in case they lose anything or have any damage to any personal possessions. And some tips on reducing housing costs. So some ways to really conserve where we are in our budget. So grocery costs. We have places like Aldi's, Lidl, where costs of groceries are a little bit more budget friendly. Maybe we don't need to be shopping at Whole Foods for everything that we have. Parking passes on campus. So maybe the student is walking to campus if they're in walking distance instead of having to park on campus. Furniture. So we love a sustainability effort. So think about, you know, reducing some of our carbon footprint by purchasing things that are already out there, such as Facebook Marketplace is a really great place to find furniture that is thrifted, and typically older furniture is made a little bit better than newer furniture in some cases. So you might have a little bit higher quality there too. Places like Facebook Marketplace, Goodwill, Salvation Army, these are really great places to go. And then also to utilities. Look for places where utilities might be included in that price for rent, as well as some energy saving programs as well. So then we want to think about outfitting our apartment. We want to think about, do we really need, LED lights that look like a waterfall that when you come in, it looks like some enchanted garden? Or do we need lighting that's going to be suitable for us to do our studying and to be able to, do some reading at nighttime? We want to think of our needs versus our wants. So we know that we need some suitable lighting for studying, but we don't necessarily need to look like it's a fairy tale wedding. So these are things that we need to consider. We talked about the longevity of furniture as well as splitting costs. If you're going to have stuff within your shared living space, maybe someone's going to cover the couch if you need a couch. Someone's going to cover side tables. Split up those costs within those roommates, and that's really going to help kind of budget out a little bit more and kind of spread that dollar, so you're not just depending on one person that's going to spend majority of the cost for that. As well as look for places to get household furniture. So there's going to be different places like we talked about, whether that's thrifting or brand new items, but definitely do some cost comparison. And we do offer some really great tools. These are some examples. It might be a little bit difficult to see with some of the typing on it, just with the font size. But our services are free for students, and we can actually sit down with them and go through these documents and these tools and resources to help people really kind of figure out what's going to be the best option for them. So we can sit down, create a budget, figure out how much they want to spend on groceries, each line, whether that's utilities, transportation, etc. And these documents will definitely help kind of take that into consideration if that's something that you wanted to walk through on your own.
Thank you, Ashley. I think we'll transition at this point to financial aid. So Bruce, talk to us a little bit about the financial aid ins and outs of the board markets.
All right, yeah. Let's start from the beginning. And the first thing that students need to do is going to be to fill out the free application for federal student aid. So make sure that you have done that. And I know you've seen on the news about all the trouble that we've had with the free application for federal student aid rollout. And they've changed the formula. They've changed everything about the form, allegedly to make it easier. It was originally called the FAFSA Simplification Project, but as everybody got into it, it really didn't turn out to be that simple. But that a FAFSA, of course, determines eligibility for all types of financial aid: Pell Grant, state grants, student loans. Generally, every type of financial aid that we offer, the FAFSA determines it. One word about state grants, and you may know this, you don't have to fill out a separate application to qualify for state aid. It's all done through the FAFSA. North Carolina State Education Assistance Authority receives all FAFSAs for all North Carolina students, regardless of where they go to school. And they compile that information and determine eligibility for state grants. And they send us that information and we put it on your award package. And so there's really no separate application for that. In order to use financial aid to pay for an off-campus apartment, you have to have more financial aid than the cost of the school. And as an off-campus student, you're just going to be charged tuition and fees, books if you're going through the first day program, and insurance. Now with insurance, if you already have insurance, the bursar's office will ask you to provide proof of that insurance, and they'll take that off the bill. So in that case, you're just going to be charged for tuition and fees, which is together is $7,214 for the year, and divide that in half for fall and divide that in half for spring, the other half for spring. And in order to get that refund, you have to have more financial aid than the cost of the school, the cost of tuition and fees for the semester. Now, we'll disperse aid 10 days before class, right? 10 days before classes begin. That is the legal maximum or the maximum amount of time before classes start in which we can disperse aid. Refunds usually are delivered to the student sometime after that, probably within 5 days after disbursement. And they're delivered in two ways. You can sign up for direct deposit, in which case the money will be deposited in directly into your bank account, or you can opt to get a paper check, and that paper check will go to whatever your home address is that you have on file with the university. We can't release aid any earlier than that, and most of the apartment complexes in the Charlotte region know that that's going to happen, right? And you'll have to work with each individual apartment complex to see how that works. Most apartments, of course, are going to want first month's rent deposit up front. I have known a few who would wait for a refund if you could show proof of a refund, but those probably aren't many. So when you do your planning, just realize that. Do you get more or less aid if you live off campus? Not really. We kind of budget. We budget when we consider how much a student gets. We formulate a budget and we say we figure the student's going to pay this for tuition fees, room and board, gas, laundry, incidentals, and then we figure an aid package based on that and based on the information from the FAFSA. So if you live off campus, it doesn't mean that you get less financial aid. Remember too that your financial aid is based on the number of credit hours. What I just described is a situation where a student is taking 12 hours, which is full-time. Your aid can be reduced if you take less than full-time hours, right? Students can only get a loan, for example, if they take 6 credit hours or more. If you take less than 6, then you're not going to be eligible for a student loan, and your Pell and State grant will also be reduced. So remember that credit hours affects your aid, and the aid affects your refund, right? Another consideration too, when you sign the lease, is if you're using financial aid to pay for the apartment or using a refund, is that you have to continue to make satisfactory academic progress. And that's evaluated based on two things. You have to make at least a 2.0 grade point average. And then the other thing is you have to pass 2/3 of the courses that you attend. So there's a two-pronged approach to satisfactory academic progress. We check progress once a year. You can go on warning if you don't make one of those two criteria after the fall semester and put you on probation for the spring. And then if you don't make that criteria at the end of spring, your financial aid eligibility is canceled, which means you won't get aid for the next year. You can appeal that decision provided there's some significant reason for it. That would be some circumstance, death in the family, some other difficulty that you've run up against. Simply saying I didn't like my professor, or I didn't like calculus, or whatever may not get your appeal approved. So just be aware that it has to be for a significant reason. And we try to be as understanding and merciful as we can when we review those appeals. So those are the couple of the critical things. You got to file your FAFSA. And I know many of you are wondering, well, when am I going to get my financial aid award? I haven't seen anything yet. Here we are, middle of March, or actually end of March, sorry, and I don't see anything. Still working through some things with the feds. We hope to get it out at least by the second week of August. I'm sorry, Jesus. Yeah, the way it looks, it may be August at this point. April, the second week of April. And it will show up in your self-service account once we do that. And we'll notify you through email to say, hey, your financial aid is ready. We hope things will be ready by then for you. So file your FAFSA, make sure that your financial aid is more than your tuition and fees. Sign up for direct deposit and realize that it's not going to disperse until 10 days before class. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Bruce. All right. Ashley, talk to us about the legal implications of living.
I'm going to talk about the legal implications of living off campus, just like Christy said. On the next slide, I'll give a little intro about what is Student Legal Services, just briefly. We're a nonprofit law firm located here on the campus at UNC Charlotte. We provide students with confidential legal advice and resources and referrals. We are a separate legal entity from the university, and so we operate on campus through an agreement with UNC Charlotte. One of the terms in that agreement is that we cannot advise students in legal disputes against each other or against the University or the state of North Carolina. Students who are currently enrolled in on-campus based degree seeking programs who are assessed the student activity fee are eligible for our services, like semester per semester. And we also advise student organizations other than the student government itself. Because we are funded through the student activity fee, our services are available at no additional charge. And so it's a good starting place for students to talk about what their legal rights and options are in a situation. So some quick tips on signing a lease, because I know a lot of people are maybe at that stage in securing their housing for next school year. As you can imagine, I'm going to tell you to read things before you sign it. I know Ashley mentioned reading the fine print on the insurance and everything. I'm going to read everything on the lease as well. Read all of the addenda, because a lot of the leases for student living apartments right around campus use a form lease that can be up to like 60, 70 pages long sometimes with a lot of addenda. And if you have a guarantor signing your lease, I recommend that they sign it as well, because they're financially responsible for the lease if for some reason it doesn't get paid. Our office can review leases with students before they sign the lease. They can contact our office to make an appointment to review the lease, and we ask that they email it to our main email address, which we can provide. I think it may be on here somewhere too, but either way, they can also go to our website and fill out an intake form with the information that they need their lease reviewed and send the lease, and we can reach out to make an appointment. It is important to keep an eye on the signing deadlines or the rent increases, especially like during the spring while complexes right around the campus are signing leases. There may be an increase, like every week the monthly rent goes up X amount of dollars until you sign. And so just keep a lookout for that if as you're planning to see maybe what some of your budgeting is going to look like, because that can increase every week or so potentially, and that increases your monthly rent times the 12 months that or right around 12 months you're paying on the lease. If you don't have a guarantor, the property may require a deposit of a few months rent that has to be paid up front, which will be ahead of the financial aid disbursement that Bruce was describing. So there are some students who are asked to pay the first and last month's rent up front, sometimes even when they sign in the spring or into like maybe May or so. I've seen that happen sometimes, depends on the complex, but that's a big part of the planning, because some complexes, as Bruce mentioned, may be willing to look at proof of the aid award in the fall when you haven't gotten your refund and that September rent is due. But I would find it highly unlikely that they would look at a financial aid disbursement for your 2 months deposit in May for your fall award. So I would plan accordingly for that if you don't have a guarantor and they're charging a deposit. On our website studentlegal.charlotte.edu, under the services tab, there are some really helpful resources that are listed on this third little box here. They're also linked in these slides at the end to our guide and a checklist for moving in and moving out and a suggested repair form. We get a lot of questions at Student Legal Services, especially in the spring, from folks who have renewed their lease for the next school year, like the next August 2024 to July 2025, and no longer want to live in the place, or just in the middle of the lease term don't want to live there. And it's really important to know that there's really only a few legal exceptions to break a lease in North Carolina without paying the rest of the rent due. And that's applicable even if you have not moved in yet. So if you've signed a lease for next August, and then you decide you want to live with other friends in another complex, the apartment complex is highly, highly unlikely to just cancel that lease and not charge you the rent for the next year. So if you go sign that other lease, you may owe 2 rent payments every month, even for a place you're not living at. And there may be exceptions like subletting and finding a subletter to take over that new lease or the rest of your current lease, if the landlord allows it, and probably with some fees involved. Active duty military members that are with orders to move, tenants with domestic violence protective orders and no contact orders who have court issued 1-year orders. If the rental unit is uninhabitable based on city code, like maintenance issues, not uninhabitable, like I hate my roommate, or I don't like the pool and things like that. Or if your landlord is harassing the tenant or violating their civil rights. So note in that paragraph with those few exceptions that safety concerns and roommate issues are not exceptions to the main tenant in North Carolina, that you can't break your lease without paying the rest is what owed. This applies for leases for next academic year. And if you move into a place next August or this August, and then by October, you sign a renewal lease for 25-26, if you try to break your lease the next January, you're trying to break your 24-25 lease and your 25-26 lease, which can get really complicated. Next slide, please. We have some tips on moving in and then things during the lease term. Some of this is going to overlap with some things that Ashley said about like documenting conditions. When tenants move in, they should fill out the condition form and take photo and video documentation of the apartment and submit repair requests immediately for things that are noted. I have students do a walkthrough on a video, take the pictures of the room, take the pictures of specific issues that are going to be submitted as work requests, and then also take a video walkthrough where you walk in the room, hit each light switch, open the drawers on the provided furniture, like full notation of everything. You really should put in your repair request in writing on the landlord's online portal or via email. We have a suggested form that we can provide for students if their landlord doesn't use a portal to email and like fill that out line by line specifically. Keep records of your submitted written request. If the landlord's portal sends an email of your request once you submitted it, save it. If it doesn't, screenshot the screen that shows what you typed in, screenshot that, and then when you submit it with the timestamp, screenshot that as well. If you talk to a landlord in person or their staff at the office about a repair, follow up with an email in writing as well, still document it. It's hard to ask for rent abatement of like a rental refund for untimely or uncompleted repairs if there's no written record of it. It's practically impossible. If the landlord doesn't complete repairs, you can ask for abatement, but you can ask our office about help with that and demand letters and what your options are. But remember that last bullet point is one of the most important ones on here. You have to keep paying rent if the repairs aren't made. In some states, you can withhold rent if the repairs aren't made. That is not true in North Carolina, and you can face an eviction filing, which can hurt your future housing, even if you end up paying the rent late and they let you stay. So do not withhold the rent. Keep paying and document everything, and then come see our office if it's been an unreasonable amount of time and they haven't fixed something. Next slide, please. After you move out, or when you're moving out, take the same steps as when you move in. Document everything after all your stuff's been packed. We have on our checklist steps for moving in and moving out, and that's on our website. And then I've got this thing about mind the gap. If a tenant transfers units within the same complex, or if they move to another complex, they'll likely have a gap in housing from late July, when most of these leases end, until mid-August, when most of the student leases start. So if you're a student or you yourself are in a lease that ends around July 31st, and your next lease is in August 15th, and you're moving to a new complex, your current complex is unlikely to let you stay till August 15th because they have to turn that room over for a new renter, and your new complex is unlikely to let you move in early because they have to turn over the room for you to move in. And so it is very, very unlikely that they make exceptions without potentially a fee, and I've still seen that be very rare. So this is another really important point, because we have students come to us in July and say, I just figured out I have nowhere to go for 2 weeks, and your stuff is floating out there in the ether wherever you're going to have to put it, or maybe take it back home and bring it back. And so that's really important. And it even counts sometimes if you're moving from one apartment to another in the same complex. And landlords can charge tenants for damages beyond normal wear and tear. And if it's in a common area and there's not a person who's owning up to the damage, or it's absolutely clear who caused the damage, the landlord can split those damage charges among the tenants. And yeah, it's just really important to keep an eye on all this stuff. And if you pay a security deposit, the landlord can deduct for wear and tear, and then you have the right to challenge that if you think you're being charged for things you didn't do, whether you have a security deposit or not. If you have a deposit, they bill from that and have to return it within 30 days of moving out. But if you don't pay a deposit, they just straight up bill you, and you can challenge that, but it's going to be hard to do without all that documentation that we talked about before. So that's some really quick tips from the legal side of things about living off campus. Thanks.
Ashley. So that brings us to the practical implications of living on campus. And so Labria, talk to us about those.
Hi, everybody. So we'll talk about some of the practical implications of living off campus. We can go to the next slide. So a quick did you know? So there are 6,225 beds on campus, and about 30,000 students enroll at UNC Charlotte. So as you can imagine, that means most students will live off campus for a significant part of their experience here at UNC Charlotte. Also, we are moving into the direction of a first-year live-on requirement that we're hoping to take effect in fall 2025. That means first-year students will have priority in space, and the space for returning and continuing students will be limited. Also, like most institutions our size, we are only designed to house about 20% of the student population. And so as we're seeing the increase in demand currently, most students have lived off campus historically. We've never been designed to house every student for their 4 years at UNC Charlotte. And so with that being said, the good part about that is there's about 20,000 beds within a 2-mile radius of campus. And so that means students have plenty of options within close walking distance or shuttle distance of campus. Next slide. So like I stated, I'm the assistant director for off-campus student services, and I run the Niner Choice program. And so this is just a quick overview of off-campus student services and Niner Choice. And so we're a unit in housing and residence life. Our commitment is to assist those students in making the most of their off-campus experience. We want to help guide students to transition from living at home or on campus to the off-campus life. We want to help students and their supporters be savvy customers with those off-campus options and facilitate those connections between off-campus students and those valuable campus resources. And so the Niner Choice program is a safety initiative that is designed to help students and their supporters make those informed decisions about living off campus and what those options are. It's a partnership between Housing and Residence Life, Police and Public Safety, and CMPD. And again, we focus on supporting the safety of students and building those relationships with campus resources. No, it is not a stamp of approval or an endorsement from UNC Charlotte or CMPD, and it is not a guarantee of student safety. And it's not an option for every property. And so the participating properties will adhere to certain safety standards. They have to meet or not meet or exceed the crime and thresholds made by CMPD, and agree to undergo their physical and administrative assessment that we will conduct with them. Next slide. And so on the screen are some general tips and disclaimers. I won't read those word by word, but some that we like to highlight. Sometimes they say, but it has university in its name. And so just know that everything off campus is independently owned and managed. And so we establish those good relationships with those properties, but we do not have those influences over their business practices. We also hear it's supposed to be student only. And so note that a lot of properties have moved into this direction. Student only means that students are enrolled somewhere. And so know that that doesn't mean that they're a UNC Charlotte student. They often say, I don't know anyone who will be my roommates. A lot of the complexes offer roommate matching services. And so you can talk to those specific properties about what they do to match roommates. And also the off-campus housing website has a roommate finder feature, and it's pretty cool. You can go on, make a profile, talk a little bit about yourself, and then read a little bit about other UNC Charlotte students specifically on our roommate finder. And then those complexes will work together to group you or assign you with who you would like to be assigned with. We often hear, I don't know how to cook, or I don't have a car. A lot of those complexes, again, are walking distance. Those that are not walking distance provide shuttles, and they have different shuttle times and systems set up so you can know when the shuttles are coming, etc. And you can opt to have the most modest meal plan for campus, so you can still have meals for campus while you learn how to cook, or your student learns how to cook. And so not knowing where to start is where we come in, me specifically. And so we always recommend starting that search with the Nine of Choice program. Know that you are not required to stay at those properties, but know that that's our starting point. Read those online reviews, talk to other students about those properties, and just know that we cannot recommend specific properties as well. And then we've talked about some financial implications already about affordability. And so know that those expenses on and off campus can be tricky, and you can consult with Niner Central, financial aid about your package. And then again, limit those expenses by eliminating those meal plans or parking permits on campus. Next slide. And so some of this is already what we've said together, but I'll highlight some really important ones. Start as early as you can, but don't feel pressure to sign your lease. Feel free to use student legal services to go over that lease term with you. Again, start with us, the Nine of Choice program. Consider what you need and what you don't by making those checklists and what are those require and idea amenities. Looking at those reviews again, look at those common themes, look at what's most recent. Reach out to those apartment complexes and ask questions about some of the things that you may feel like is a theme. Utilize the CMPD crime mapping as well. Visit those apartments that you are interested in person. Take a list of questions that you may have and ask those questions in person. Trust your instincts. Again, going back to reading that lease before you sign it, getting help understanding your lease, documenting everything, and consider that renter's insurance. And so here are some questions to consider asking in regards to lease terms. What's that lease term? Is it renewable? What does early termination look like? Those associated costs, restrictions on subletting or subleasing. What are those rate related questions are here? What's that monthly rent? When is it due? What are there any fees or penalties for late payments? Do they offer split payments if that's necessary for your financial situation? Is renter's insurance required? When it comes to maintenance and repairs, ask how those maintenance, repairs, and requests are handled. Is there a 24-hour emergency number? And are there scheduled inspections during your lease term? We've already talked a little bit about utilities and bills. So what utilities may be included in the rent and which ones are not? How do they provide their average cost for the utilities, and what are those security deposits if they're required? How is it returned? As Ashley stated. When considering safety and security, what are those security measures that are put in place? Alarms, locks, gates, cameras, etc. Does the property have a contracted security company, and what are their hours? So maybe you know when to expect them. And what are some of the safety or security concerns that are most reported to the property? And then lastly, some questions to consider when it comes to parking and transportation. Is there additional fees for parking if there's parking available? How does guest parking work? And what does that shuttle operation look like? Next slide. So here are some safety tips that we would like to share with you all. And so before renting an off-campus apartment, you can survey the residents to ensure that they have some of the following security features. So asking again about the gate. Do they have metal or solid core entry or exit doors? And so are there any doors equipped with deadbolts? What do the straight pates look like, etc.? How the keys have been rekeyed since last the tenant was there. You can ask questions and pay attention to those peepholes and windows so you can easily identify someone before opening the door to them. Consider are all of the first floor fire escape or other accessible windows equipped with locks. What does that landscaping look like? What does it block your doors or windows from the public view? Consider could someone hide behind those that landscaping, so those bushes or trees. Is there adequate lighting at the building entries, along the sidewalks, in the breezeways, etc.? And all the exterior doors kept locked at all times. And then ask about and consider having, does the apartment have a smoke detector with at least 2 escape routes? We would recommend downloading that LifeSafe app, the MyCMPD app, and the Citizens app. We always tell students and families and supporters, never leave those valuable items in your car. Don't leave your vehicle running, unattended, unlocked. Don't have a key outside. Don't loan a phone or to a stranger, and don't hold any exterior doors open. And to just take an active role in your own safety when living off campus, and then report anything that you think is suspicious. Next slide. Okay, so in closing, just know that many students enjoy living off campus and that off-campus life because it comes with more privacy, more space, more independence, but it also comes with more responsibility. And so be mindful of that. It can also be less expensive to live off campus. It just depends on where you live, how well you stick to a budget, and those that you live with, and how many people may live with you. So just going back to how important it is to ask those critical questions so you're prepared, so your students are prepared as possible. Like Ashley's already said, know that move in and move out date, as well as what their approach is to turn those units as well. And so sometimes students are surprised to learn that they may not be moving into a completely unoccupied and professional clean apartment even in August. So sometimes students move into spaces where someone has renewed, and so there's someone already living there. So just keep that in mind. And lastly, we just tell you guys to do your homework, and it's important to do that. Read that lease carefully, utilize the resources and on-campus offices that we can provide. And again, start that search early. You can start it with the non-choice program, but remember, you're not required to stay at those properties as well. And that is all I have.
So we've mentioned throughout this presentation that there are a ton of resources on each of our websites. This is a list of just some of them. And so please know you can do a much deeper dive at your own convenience to learn much more about any one of these topics. We have some time for some questions, and so if you have not put a question in the chat, still would like to do that, there's plenty of time, to do that, but we'll start with a few basic questions. So Ashley, from a student legal services perspective, can you talk a little bit more about renters insurance and help people unpack that a little bit more?
Sure. So I know 3 of the 4 speakers here talked about renters insurance and highly recommended it. It's usually, I think, less than about $20 a month, and which is well worth the cost for that premium in case if you have damage to your property. There are a lot of times when you look at the breakdown of your monthly rent payment, there's especially at the larger corporation owned complexes right around campus, there's a fee for insurance every month, right? So you may think that's insurance for you, but it's actually typically the landlord, the property owners, a payment towards helping with their insurance premium and isn't protection for your own property. So you'll want to see, sometimes it's called like a building protection fee. You'll see that a lot. That's a fee for protection towards the property itself, not your property within the apartment. So even though it may say insurance or protection fee, you want to really dig into what that means. And it's usually defined somewhere in that lease or in that addendum about the insurance, and make sure that you have your own renter's insurance. So just wanted to highlight that again.
Thank you. And either Ashley or Labria, can you talk a little bit about the difference between renting an entire apartment and renting just a bedroom, and what perhaps the positives and negatives of those 2 different arrangements?
Yeah, so I'll start off and then Ashley chime in whenever. And so renting the bedroom, you'll only be responsible for that bedroom, that cost, and what happens in your bedroom, and then you will share those common areas. And so the kitchen, the living room, anything in those spaces. And so a bonus to that is that you have your own space, and it is a little bit more cost efficient because you're not renting a whole unit. If you have like a 2 or 3 or 4 bedroom apartment and you're sharing it with others. And maybe one of those cons is that if you're moving into a space with other students, then just know that you're sharing that common space, and so that may be one of those cons. And so you have to maybe work out some roommate agreements, and you're deciding on what temperature you like the air to be on, or how the cleaning schedule will go. And so that's just something to consider as well.
Yeah, and I'll say from the legal perspective, a lot of the complexes right around campus, each student signs an individual lease for the bedroom that they're living in, and they're the only name on the lease. It's the bedroom and access to the common areas, right? And perhaps their own bathroom. The further you are from campus, the more likely you may be presented with a joint lease, which means if it's me and 2 roommates, the lease is for the apartment and has all 3 of our names on it, which means we're all jointly responsible for the full amount of rent. So instead of the 3 of us paying, I'm just going to make a round number, $1,000 a month, it just says this rent is $3,000 a month. And I'm just, again, I just picked a number. It's not an absolute example. But the difference there is that lease probably says somewhere in the joint lease that it's called a joint and several liability lease, just meaning in plain English that the landlord wants the $3,000 a month in that example, no matter who pays it, right? So a lot of times the tenants will split up what they pay and pay one person who pays the landlord. Well, if one of your roommates doesn't pay 1 month and you have to spot that extra $1,000 with the second person, or however you split it up, the landlord isn't going to take action against that one person, or that's between you and them, right? And that if that doesn't get paid, you have like a small claims court situation if you really take it that far. The other thing is if one of the people doesn't pay and the 2 other roommates say, we're not covering for them because we did it last month and we're not getting that money back, the landlord only gets $2,000, they can try to evict every single person. And so that also sometimes with a joint lease like that, damages in any bedroom could be jointly charged to everyone rather than just common area charges with individual leases. They have their positives and negatives, but it's something to look for, and you're not going to see it as much right around campus, but it's important to see. It's really like whose name is on there is going to mean a lot.
Thank you both. From a Niner Finances perspective, Ashley, can you talk to us a little bit more about the other resources that Niner Finances offers? Maybe not specific just to the off-campus experience, but to students in general, and how a student who's interested in connecting with your office can schedule an appointment.
Yeah, so one of the really unique experiences when it does come to including the off-campus experience is we offer one-on-one financial coaching. And when students come in, one of the things that we make sure every student who comes in covers is what's called their financial plan to graduation. So we sit down with those students, and for every semester, whether or not they're going to take summer classes or a certain amount of credit hours in certain semesters, we sit down with them and figure out what is going to be our expected cost for everything. We want them to figure out, are they thinking about moving off campus? How much do they think that's going to cost? What do they think about like their meal plan, things of that nature? So not only do we sit down and do that, we teach people how to budget. From there, we also really emphasize on saving and investing, starting for retirement. It's never too early to start saving for retirement. Our students are here to build themselves up, to learn, to really improve their futures. And part of that future is their retirement. So we really focus in on that. We also teach people about salary negotiation, employee benefits, things of that nature. And we also give them tools for investing. We don't advise people on what to invest in, but we teach them the tools of, these are some learning resources for understanding the different terminology when it does come to investing.
Sorry, I got muted again. Bruce, can you walk folks through the FAFSA and how to initiate that if they have not already?
Yes, the website is studentaid.gov, and they'll need an FSA ID, and I put the link to how to get an FSA ID in the chat, in the Q&A part of the chat. I'm assuming everybody can see that. And that FSA ID is good forever, and you'll need it every year that you do the FAFSA, because you have to do the FAFSA every year. And you also need it when you go into, if you borrow a student loan, you also need that FSA ID. Is your permanent ID when you go to repay your loans years down the road. So it's something that you'll want to keep. Create an ID that you're going to remember, because you're going to need it probably forever and ever afterwards if you're dealing with the federal government. Once you get into the FAFSA, for those students who don't have any trouble getting in, it's fairly easy. Now you can connect directly to the IRS, and it will download the income information directly into the form. And so you're done in about 5-10 minutes. It's not like the old days where you had to have your tax forms in front of you and you're looking for line 36 and line 42 and all that. It's just 2 clicks and it automatically populates most of the things you're going to need on the FAFSA. When you start out, it's the student's portion first, and it'll say, do you give permission for your parents to fill out the rest if you're a dependent student, for example? And you have to put in your parents' email address, and it kind of works like DocuSign if you're familiar with that. And then the parent gets an email, and then they give permission to, you give your parent permission to fill out the rest of the form. And I know that is a foreign concept, giving your parents permission to do something, but that's the way the IRS wants it done. And I would not attempt to bypass the automated IRS download and try to enter it in manually. what we're finding is students who've entered the stuff in manually aren't getting valid results. So just go ahead and determine you're going to use the automated function and process it that way. And you'll sign it with that FSA ID. So that in a nutshell is how you get started, and we'll get the results. There's a place to add our school, UNC Charlotte, and it's a drop-down menu. You just click it and add our school, and we'll get the results in about 48 hours.
With the time that we have left, what is your best advice or your most common advice that you give to students or that you wish you had known as a student?
I would say just to ask questions. Ask the questions that you may not think are important or that you may feel like it's odd, because it's better to ask and to know than not ask and not know. And use the resources that we have. Again, my name is Labria, and you can reach out to me with any questions you have about off-campus properties.
Go ahead, Ashley. You're fine.
When it comes to finances, I think about a lot of students who don't really factor in their dining out habits when it comes to their budget. And a lot of students will spend money on groceries, but they also eat out all the time. So I think being honest with yourself and really factoring in how often are you eating out? Because if that's the case, then let's kind of compensate with what we're spending on groceries instead of spending all this money, wasting a lot of food, and then also eating out. And I think that's one thing, one piece of advice I always like to tell students is really be honest with yourself.
Yeah, I think those are great tips from both of you. You're probably not surprised to hear me say, read the lease. A lot of times when a student asks us during the lease, can the property management / landlord do X, Y, and Z? The first thing we always ask for, just like when they need a lease review, is I need to see the lease before I can answer yes or no, or even maybe, or it depends. And a lot of times we find it right there in that lease, right? And also just keep your paper trail and documentation. Labria mentioned ask questions. I would rather you document stuff and come ask me about it, even if the answer is yes, they can charge you for that, than feel like you can't, because that could, have you spend money that you maybe don't need to, or at least sometimes it's a learn from it type situation. Like, okay, I can be charged for that. Unfortunately, there's not really a way out of that, and it won't happen again. And then it's something for the future. And so we want you to ask us questions as well.
And to tag on to that, I think it's important to live within your means. I see some students, particularly younger students, they borrow excessively with student loans because they're borrowing to fund a lifestyle, not borrowing necessarily to fund an education. And that's where you get into trouble. You get into the apartment complex and you see the tennis courts and you see the jacuzzi and you see the swimming pool and like, yeah, this is the kind of life I want to live. And it may be that's all you get for the next 4 years, and afterwards you're saddled with a lot of loan debt, and that kind of financial slavery you really don't need. So that's my warning about borrowing. Use it when you need it, I guess, is the last word on that one.
Perfect. Well, that takes us right up to 6 o'clock. Thank you again for joining us. Thanks to our panelists and for all of the good tips and wisdom that they shared. Please remember that our offices are here year-round and are happy to help as needed. And if you reach out to any one of us and need somebody else, we can certainly help to facilitate that connection, make that referral, and help you find the information you need. So please don't be shy. Please use us as you need to. And we thank you again for being here. And wish you all the best as you wrap up that year. Thanks so much. Take care.